Colonel Emma Grant, a high-ranking officer in the U.S. Marine Corps who has faced years of unspoken battles and silent challenges. Emma has fought not only for her country, but for her place within it, pushing through doubt and bias to rise through the ranks. But as she heads to Washington, D.C. to deliver a crucial speech on diversity in the military, she faces one more unexpected trial. At the airport, she's met with suspicion, subtle and not so subtle resistance that challenges her right to be where she's earned her place. This moment of confrontation is about more than just a flight. It becomes a turning point in her journey, bringing her to the national stage and testing her resolve as she speaks truth to power. What lies ahead for Colonel Grant? Will her story spark the change she's worked so hard to inspire? Join us in this powerful exploration of resilience, leadership, and the quiet strength it takes to confront barriers from within. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of courage and transformation. Share your thoughts below. What would you do in her shoes? Now, let's dive into Emma's journey. Colonel Emma Grant stood at the curb outside LAX, watching the constant stream of travelers moving in and out of the sliding glass doors. Taxis and rideshare cars pulled up in steady succession, dropping off passengers in a sea of luggage, hurried farewells, and eager anticipation. She was part of it all, yet somehow a soldier in civilian clothes, a Marine colonel among civilians, just another passenger to anyone who happened to glance her way. Dressed in simple dark jeans, a gray sweater, and a worn leather jacket, Emma felt she could finally be invisible, a rare sensation that she cherished more than she cared to admit. Her tall, athletic frame and the quiet confidence in her stride might have given her away if someone looked closely enough. But today, she felt like she could slip by without drawing a second glance. After all, she wasn't here to command a room or lead a mission. She was here as Emma Grant, a woman traveling to Washington, D.C., just like any other passenger in the crowded terminal. She tightened her grip on her duffel bag, feeling the soft leather beneath her fingers. It was a bag she'd carried for years, its creases and faded patches telling a story of countless flights, deployments, and moves. Emma looked down at the patch sewn onto the side, a memento from her early days in the Corps, a small reminder of where she'd come from, where she was headed, and all the moments in between. Today, she was on her way to speak at a military summit, a gathering of top military officials and leaders from around the country. She'd been invited as a keynote speaker, specifically to address the need for diversity and inclusion in military leadership. It was a topic close to her heart, and though she'd spoken on it many times before, this invitation felt different. She was finally speaking to an audience that had the power to enact the change she'd been advocating for since her first days in the Corps. But with the excitement came a nagging tension that lingered in the back of her mind. She was used to being the first in many rooms, used to the double take when she introduced herself as Colonel Grant, used to the questions that never seemed to disappear entirely. But this time, she would be speaking openly about her experiences, about the barriers she'd faced, and the progress that still needed to be made. And while she knew it was necessary, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension. Taking a deep breath, Emma squared her shoulders and stepped through the sliding glass doors, blending into the crowd with practiced ease. The terminal was packed, bustling with energy. She scanned the room, letting her senses take in the details as she would on any mission. Families huddled together, parents corralling children with weary smiles. Business travelers in crisp suits clutched their laptops and coffee cups, moving with single-minded focus toward their gates. Young couples laughed together, oblivious to the rush around them. As she moved through the terminal, Emma couldn't help but notice the occasional glance in her direction. She was used to it by now, the subtle, questioning looks, the silent assumptions people made based on her appearance. Today, though, she kept her gaze forward, her expression calm. She wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. She was simply here to board her flight. Reaching the security line, Emma joined the steady stream of passengers winding through the checkpoint. The line snaked around metal barriers, inching forward as TSA agents called passengers up one by one. Emma waited patiently, feeling the rhythm of the line, the quiet murmurs of travelers filling the air around her. In front of her, A young family tried to manage their twin toddlers, who seemed determined to escape their parents' grasp and explore the terminal on their own terms. The mother shot Emma an apologetic smile as one of the twins toddled toward her, hands outstretched in a carefree wobble. Emma returned the smile, reaching out to gently guide the toddler back toward his parents, who thanked her with grateful nods. She allowed herself a small smile, feeling the warmth of the brief interaction. Moments like these were grounding, a reminder of the simpler joys in life that she rarely got to experience in uniform. In these fleeting seconds, she was just another traveler, connected by shared experiences rather than divided by titles or ranks. As the line moved forward, Emma pulled out her phone, checking the time. She was comfortably early, giving herself ample time to navigate the airport's many checkpoints. She knew the summit awaited her, knew that the speech she would give held a certain weight. She had practiced her words, pored over her notes, and yet a sliver of doubt crept into her mind. She crafted her speech to convey the need for reform in the military, to push for a more inclusive future that welcomed diverse backgrounds and perspectives. It was a message she believed in deeply, but she knew it wouldn't be easy to deliver. Her experiences weren't just statistics or policy points, they were personal, and sharing them openly required a vulnerability she rarely allowed herself to feel. The line moved again, and Emma stepped forward, approaching the checkpoint where a young TSA agent was stationed. He looked barely old enough to have finished college, his expression one of polite efficiency as he took IDs and checked boarding passes. As Emma handed over her ID and ticket, she saw a flicker of surprise cross his face, a reaction that was both familiar and exhausting. "Colonel Grant?" he asked, looking up at her with wide eyes. The disbelief was clear, even as he tried to mask it with a forced smile. "That's right," Emma replied, keeping her tone neutral. She had learned over the years to meet these moments with patience, though it wore thin at times. She watched as he glanced at her ID, his gaze lingering a moment longer than necessary. She waited, feeling the eyes of the passengers behind her. A part of her wanted to challenge him, to ask why he felt the need to double-check her credentials, but she held back. Instead, she simply waited, letting the silence stretch between them until he finally handed her ID back. "Thank you, Colonel," he said, his tone respectful but still tinged with doubt. "You're all set." Emma nodded, taking her ID and ticket with a calm smile. "Thank you." As she moved through the checkpoint, she could feel the quiet whispers of the passengers behind her, the curious glances that followed her as she collected her belongings from the conveyor belt. She knew they were wondering about her, questioning her presence in this space. It was a feeling she had grown accustomed to, a weight she carried with her every time she stepped into a room where she was not expected or easily accepted. By the time she reached her gate, Emma's mind had shifted fully to her upcoming speech. She found a quiet corner near the large windows that overlooked the runway, watching planes take off and land against the backdrop of a clear blue sky. The sight had always brought her a sense of calm, a reminder of the vastness of the world beyond her current challenges. Pulling out her phone, she opened the notes for her speech, scanning over the carefully chosen words and phrases. She crafted each line to convey her message clearly, to strike a balance between honesty and restraint. She wanted to push for change without alienating her audience, to inspire rather than accuse. But as she read over her notes, she felt a pang of doubt. She thought back to the beginning of her career, the early days when she had walked into training with a heart full of determination and a head full of ideals. She had known from the start that the journey would be difficult, that she would face challenges her peers would not, but she hadn't fully understood the weight of it until she lived it. There had been moments small, subtle, insidious, where she was made to feel like an outsider, where her abilities were questioned, not because of her actions, but because of who she was. She had learned to navigate these moments, to push forward despite the quiet doubts and whispered judgments. But now, standing at the edge of a stage she'd worked her whole life to reach, she wondered if she was ready to speak openly about the cost of her journey. A voice over the intercom announced that boarding would begin shortly, pulling Emma from her thoughts. She slipped her phone back into her pocket, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. Whatever doubts lingered, whatever fears threatened to surface, she knew she had to set them aside. This wasn't just her story, it was the story of countless others who had walked the same path, faced the same challenges, and persevered despite the odds. With that thought, she rose, adjusting the strap of her bag over her shoulder. She was ready to board, ready to take her place in first class, and continue the journey toward the summit, toward the speech that had the power to change minds and inspire hearts. Emma joined the first-class boarding line, her ticket in hand. She felt a sense of quiet pride in the small piece of paper, a symbol of the years of hard work that had brought her here. As she approached the gate agent, Linda, she prepared to hand over her ticket, ready to take her seat and begin the final leg of her journey. Linda, a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense expression, glanced at Emma's ticket, her gaze flickering up to meet Emma's eyes. There was a brief pause, a moment of hesitation that Emma recognized all too well. "Are you sure you're in the right line, ma'am?" "This is for first class," Linda said, her tone polite but laced with skepticism. Emma felt a familiar frustration bubble up, but she kept her expression calm. "Yes, I'm aware. I have a first-class ticket." Linda looked down at the ticket again, her brow furrowing slightly. "I'll need to see your ID, please." Emma handed over her ID, feeling the weight of the other passengers' eyes on her. She watched as Linda examined the ID, her gaze lingering on the military title and rank before flicking back up to Emma with a look that was part disbelief, part irritation. Without a word, Linda turned to her supervisor, Mark, who was standing nearby, explaining the situation in a hushed tone. Emma could catch fragments of their conversation. Verification, first class, need to double-check, and felt her patience wearing thin. Emma stood silently, her posture straight, her eyes forward, as Mark and Linda huddled over her ID like it was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. Around her, the other passengers shifted in their seats or glanced at their phones, sneaking curious glances in her direction. She could feel the weight of those glances, the subtle judgment, the questions people wouldn't ask out loud but would assume in silence. Emma reminded herself to keep her breathing steady, to maintain the calm composure she'd perfected over years of leading teams, handling crisis situations, and being in control. Still, a part of her bristled at the familiarity of it all, the same silent doubt she had felt in the TSA agent's eyes earlier, the same disbelief she had encountered throughout her career. It was exhausting to constantly stand before people who seemed determined to remind her that she didn't belong or that she had to justify her place. Linda returned, her gaze meeting Emma's with that same wary edge. Mark stood just behind her, his expression unreadable. He cleared his throat before he spoke, his tone overly polite but lined with doubt. "Ma'am, we're just going to need to verify a few details before we can proceed," he said, holding her ID as if it held all the answers to questions he wasn't quite brave enough to ask directly. Emma took a breath, her voice calm but firm. "What details would those be? I've shown you my ID, my ticket, and everything you've asked for." Mark shifted slightly, a flash of uncertainty crossing his face, but Linda quickly stepped in, her tone clipped. "It's just procedure, ma'am. We need to be cautious, especially with the current climate." Emma felt the words hit her like a quiet insult, the familiar code that masked deeper prejudices. The current climate was an excuse she'd heard before, a vague reason that people often use to avoid confronting the actual biases underlying their actions. She had been trained to interpret language and tone, to read between the lines in a way that allowed her to detect hidden motives. And in this moment, it was clear to her that they didn't need any more information. They simply needed to reconcile her appearance with their own narrow idea of who belonged in first class. She resisted the urge to cross her arms, to physically block herself from the scrutiny of those around her. Instead, she stood her ground, her gaze unwavering as she looked from Linda to Mark. "I understand that you have procedures, but I also expect to be treated with the same respect as every other passenger here. I'm a colonel in the United States Marine Corps, and I'm simply trying to board my flight." Mark glanced away, visibly uncomfortable, but Linda's expression remained tight, unmoving. She handed the ID back, but her tone was far from apologetic. "We'll need a few more minutes, ma'am. We just have to double-check with our supervisor." Emma felt her patience wearing thin, but she kept her expression neutral. She couldn't afford to lose her temper, to be seen as the angry black woman that society so often tried to paint her as. She knew that any sign of frustration, any hint of anger, would only reinforce the assumptions people already had. Instead, she chose a different approach, one that would make it clear she wasn't backing down. "Then I'll wait," she said, her tone controlled, her words carefully measured. "But let's be clear, I've done everything you've asked, and there's no reason for this additional scrutiny." As Emma waited, she allowed herself to reflect on her journey to this moment. She hadn't come this far by bending under the weight of doubt or allowing others to define her capabilities. The Marine Corps had taught her discipline, strength, and resilience, qualities she had needed to prove herself repeatedly, not only as a woman, but as a woman of color in an institution that hadn't always welcomed her. She remembered her early days, the grueling hours of basic training, where she pushed herself harder than anyone, determined to silence any whispers about whether she was tough enough or fit enough to make it through. She had endured stares and second-guessing, the subtle barriers and unspoken challenges that had followed her every step of the way. But she had persevered, proving her strength not only to herself, but to anyone who dared question her. Today, however, felt different. She had hoped that by rising to the rank of colonel, she would have left these experiences behind, that her accomplishments would speak for themselves. But standing here, waiting for validation in a crowded airport terminal, she felt the sting of every moment she'd been made to feel like she didn't belong. Her mind drifted to the summit she was heading to. She thought of the speech she would deliver, her words carefully crafted to challenge the very system that had created moments like these. The speech was more than just a professional obligation. It was her way of pushing for change, for a future where the next generation wouldn't have to face the same struggles she had endured. The intercom crackled to life, announcing the boarding of the next group, pulling her from her thoughts. Emma looked around, her gaze settling on the gate where passengers filed through, their tickets scanned without question, without hesitation. She wondered if they had any idea what it was like to stand on the other side of those quiet doubts, to be questioned not because of what they had done but because of who they were. Just as the last passengers in her boarding group stepped through, Linda returned, her expression as rigid as before. Mark stood slightly behind her, and Emma could sense the hesitation in his posture. She wasn't sure if he was uncomfortable with the situation itself, or if he was simply afraid of confrontation. But either way, she knew that neither of them was ready to back down. "Ma'am, our supervisor has confirmed everything, but we still need a few more details before you can board," Linda said, her tone clipped. Emma felt her pulse quicken, a flash of frustration breaking through her calm exterior. She had shown them everything they had asked for. She had provided her ID, her ticket, her military credentials, all without complaint. And yet, here she was, still waiting for the validation that had come so easily to every other passenger before her. "What else could you possibly need?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with the quiet strength she'd cultivated over years of facing these exact moments. "I've given you everything you asked for. Are you questioning my credentials, or simply my right to be here?" Linda shifted, her gaze flickering toward Mark, who looked momentarily taken aback. The other passengers in the area had fallen silent, their attention now fixed fully on the exchange. Emma could feel the eyes on her, the judgment in their stares, but she refused to let it sway her. Mark cleared his throat, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, we're just trying to be cautious. With the current security concerns, we have to make sure." Emma didn't let him finish. "Security concerns? You're questioning me because I don't fit your idea of who belongs in first class. But I've done everything you've asked, and I expect the same respect you'd give to anyone else." Her words hung in the air, sharp and direct, leaving no room for polite deflection. She could see the discomfort in their faces, the hesitation in their eyes as they struggled to reconcile her words with their assumptions. She knew that this wasn't just about a boarding pass or a security check. It was about the biases that had been woven into their very perception of her, biases that went unchallenged far too often. As she stood there, waiting for them to respond, she felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She had faced far worse than this, and she knew that she would face it again. But this time, She was determined not to let it pass without challenge. After what felt like an eternity, Mark finally nodded, a reluctant acceptance in his gaze. He handed her ID back with a slight dip of his head, his voice softened but still cautious. "Thank you for your patience, Colonel Grant. You're clear to board." Emma took the ID without a word, her expression calm but resolute. She could feel the tension in the air easing slightly, the crowd's interest beginning to wane as people returned to their phones and conversations. But for her, the moment remained sharp, a reminder of the challenges she continued to face. She walked toward the gate, feeling the weight of the exchange still pressing on her, a silent reminder that her journey would never be as simple as she wanted it to be. But as she handed her boarding pass to the final attendant and stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt a small surge of triumph of victory, however minor, over the doubt that had tried to overshadow her. This wasn't the last time she would have to defend her place, but it was a reminder that she would never allow anyone to deny it. She was Colonel Emma Grant, and she would not be questioned, not here, not now. Emma found her seat, 2A, in first class and placed her duffel bag carefully in the overhead compartment. She settled into the wide leather seat, feeling the welcome contrast between the spacious comfort of first class and the narrow, upright seats she'd grown accustomed to in military transport planes. But despite the comfort, her mind was not at ease. The experience at the gate clung to her, an unwelcome shadow of memories that pulled her back to similar moments she'd endured countless times before. Her phone buzzed as she checked her messages, and she saw one from General Kinsey, a short note of encouragement and a reminder of the summit's importance. She drew comfort from his words, reminding herself of her purpose. The upcoming speech had meaning beyond her. It was for those who had come before her and those who would come after. She'd spent her life training for moments like this, moments where her voice could be more than a sound, it could be a tool for change. Emma took a slow breath, her gaze focused on the runway outside. The plane would be taking off soon, taking her to a city where she'd fight not with her fists or her strength, but with her story. Her rank, her accolades, her medals, they meant something. But she knew that her experiences, the raw truth she was ready to share, would mean even more. Just as Emma was starting to feel a sense of calm, a flight attendant approached. She was young, with a polished professional smile and a demeanor that seemed to shift slightly when she looked at Emma. It was subtle, but Emma noticed it, a faint flicker of uncertainty. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said, glancing down at her tablet. "I just wanted to confirm your seat assignment. Are you traveling with a military identification?" Emma's heart sank slightly. She had already gone through this with the gate agent, yet here it was another layer of scrutiny. She felt the tightening in her chest, the familiar irritation stirring. "Yes, I'm Colonel Emma Grant," she said, keeping her tone steady but firm. "This is my assigned seat." The attendant hesitated, her fingers hovering over her tablet, as if unsure of what to do next. Emma watched her carefully, resisting the urge to cross her arms. She kept her posture neutral, but her eyes held a quiet intensity. "I'll just need to speak with the lead attendant," the flight attendant said, her voice softening as she took a step back. Emma nodded curtly. "Go ahead. I'll be right here." As the flight attendant moved away, Emma noticed a few other passengers glancing her way. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and discomfort, and she felt their silent judgments settle over her like an unwelcome weight. She could almost hear their thoughts, could almost see the unspoken assumptions they were making. Emma tried to ignore the stares, but her mind drifted back to her early days in training. She remembered the skepticism of her instructors, the subtle yet pointed comments from her peers who doubted her endurance, her strength, her ability to keep up. At the time, she had taken every comment in stride, letting the words fuel her determination. She knew they hadn't expected her to succeed, and that knowledge had only made her push herself harder. Now, sitting in first class, dressed in civilian clothes, she felt as though she was reliving those early days. She had thought that her rank, her years of service, would insulate her from moments like these, but it seemed that nothing would ever fully erase the doubts that people carried when they looked at her. They saw a tall black woman in first class and assumed something didn't add up. It was exhausting, to constantly fight for recognition, to be seen as more than just a series of assumptions. The lead flight attendant arrived, her demeanor brisk but polite. "Colonel Grant, thank you for your patience," she said, glancing at Emma's ID once more. "We just had some questions about your seat assignment, but I assure you, everything is fine." Emma gave her a brief nod, holding her gaze. "I would appreciate it if these questions didn't keep coming up. I'm here to travel just like everyone else." The attendant shifted slightly, clearly taken aback. "Of course, ma'am. We apologize for the inconvenience." Emma watched her go, feeling a mix of frustration and weariness settle over her. She could sense the tension in the cabin easing, the other passengers resuming their conversations, but she knew the damage had already been done. She had been singled out, questioned, made to feel as though she didn't belong. And now, even though the issue was supposedly resolved, she was left to deal with the lingering effects. As the plane took off, Emma leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes in an attempt to find some peace. But her mind wouldn't let her rest. Instead, she found herself pulled back to memories she thought she had moved past, moments that had shaped her, but had also left scars. She remembered her first deployment, the grueling heat, the unfamiliar terrain, and the constant vigilance required to navigate both the physical and social challenges. She had been one of the few women in her unit, and one of the only black women. She had felt the pressure to perform flawlessly, to silence any doubts her peers might have had about her capability. She had pushed herself beyond her limits, sacrificing sleep and comfort to prove that she could handle whatever came her way. But it hadn't just been her fellow soldiers' doubts she'd had to contend with. There had been superiors who questioned her resolve, who seemed to think that her presence in their ranks was a novelty rather than an asset. She had learned to mask her frustration, to channel it into her work, but the emotional toll had been heavy. She had risen through the ranks, achieved distinction, earned respect. Yet here she was years later, facing the same doubts in a civilian setting. It felt surreal, almost absurd, and yet it was a painful reminder of the work that still needed to be done. Just as Emma began to drift into a light sleep, a tap on her shoulder startled her awake. She opened her eyes to find a man standing in the aisle, a security officer wearing the Navy uniform of airport personnel. His expression was neutral, but there was a firmness in his posture that made it clear this wasn't a friendly visit. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me for a moment," he said, his tone polite but carrying the weight of authority. Emma's chest tightened. She had shown her ID, gone through security, had her ticket scanned twice. What more did they need from her? "Is there an issue?" she asked, her voice calm, but laced with an undercurrent of irritation. She kept her tone steady, refusing to let the frustration bubbling inside her show. "We just need to verify a few things," the officer replied. "If you could step out, we can clear this up quickly." Emma felt the stares of the passengers around her, the quiet murmurs that rippled through the cabin. She knew what they were thinking, the assumptions they were making. And as much as she wanted to avoid making a scene, she felt an instinctive resistance rise within her. "Officer, I provided my ID and boarding pass. I'm here on official business, and I've done everything asked of me. If there's an issue, I would appreciate it if you could address it here." The officer shifted, clearly in use to push back. "Ma'am, we just need to confirm your identity. It's protocol." Emma took a steady breath, feeling the frustration swell. Protocol seems to be more of an excuse than a necessity. I've been questioned enough today, and I'm not inclined to keep justifying my presence. Her words hung in the air, sharp and clear, cutting through the tension in the cabin. The other passengers watched, their expressions a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and for some, quiet understanding. She could feel their judgment, but she also sensed a faint ripple of empathy from a few. A couple of passengers had even started filming, their phones held low but aimed in her direction. The officer looked at her, visibly uncomfortable but unwilling to back down. "Ma'am, I need you to comply." Emma met his gaze, unyielding. "I have complied. I have shown you everything you've asked for. Now, I expect to be treated with the same respect as anyone else in this cabin." The tension in the air was palpable, a silent standoff between her and the officer. She could see the indecision in his eyes, the conflict between his duty and the discomfort her challenge had sparked. Finally, after a long pause, he nodded, stepping back slightly. "Thank you for your cooperation, Colonel Grant. You're free to continue your flight." Emma held her head high, her gaze steady as she watched him leave. She knew she had won this particular battle, but the victory was bittersweet. She had asserted her right to be here, yet the cost of that assertion weighed heavily on her. She had drawn attention, invited scrutiny, and yet she felt no satisfaction, only a weariness that settled over her like a heavy cloak. As the plane finally lifted into the air, Emma felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She had held her ground, but the experience had left a mark, a lingering sense of vulnerability that she couldn't shake. She leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the gentle hum of the engines lull her into a state of quiet reflection. She knew that this was far from over. There would be more moments like this, more challenges to her presence, more questions about her identity. But she also knew that each time she stood her ground, each time she refused to be silenced, she was chipping away at the assumptions that had defined her experience. This was the reality she lived with, the constant push and pull, the struggle to be seen and respected for who she was. And as she thought of the summit, of the speech she would soon deliver, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Emma had come this far not to be held back by doubts or judgments. She was ready to face the challenges ahead, ready to push for the change she knew was necessary. And as the plane soared above the clouds, leaving the chaos of the airport behind, she felt a quiet resolve settle within her, a strength that no one could take away. The wheels touched down with a smooth jolt, and Emma felt a rush of both relief and anticipation as the plane taxied to the gate. The sky outside was gray, the lights softened by a steady drizzle that misted the windows. She watched the rain trickle down the glass, gathering her thoughts for the day ahead. This was a pivotal moment for her, a chance to finally address a room of decision-makers who had the power to change the system she'd been a part of for so long. Her experiences, the countless obstacles she'd faced, had all led her here, to this day, to this speech. Emma waited as the other passengers filed out, choosing to be one of the last to disembark. She could feel the weight of her exhaustion, both physical and emotional, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the importance of her message. As she stepped off the plane and into the terminal, she took a deep breath, savoring the air and the new sense of purpose that accompanied it. After collecting her luggage, Emma made her way to the car waiting for her. The driver, a young man with a neatly trimmed beard and a bright smile, greeted her warmly and held the door open as she slid into the back seat. She gave him a polite nod, but her thoughts were already drifting to the summit, to the people she would face, and to the words she would speak. As she arrived at her hotel, Emma took a moment to appreciate the quiet elegance of the lobby, the gentle hum of background music and the warm lighting casting a soft glow over polished marble floors. She checked in, her expression polite but distant, her mind already drifting to the speech she would deliver in just a few short hours. Once in her room, Emma opened her laptop and reviewed her notes, reading through the carefully constructed sentences she'd spent weeks refining. Her speech was direct but respectful, acknowledging the traditions of the military while pushing for the inclusion of voices that had long been silenced or sidelined. But as she read through the lines, she felt a twinge of self-doubt. Would they truly listen? Or would her words be dismissed as another diversity lecture from someone who didn't fit their idea of a Marine leader? She'd faced this attitude before, the polite nods, the unspoken skepticism, and now, on the brink of her most important speech, the memories weighed heavily on her. Emma closed her laptop, exhaling slowly as she looked out at the city skyline. Washington, D.C. stretched out before her, a city full of power and history. She had come here not just as a soldier, but as a voice for those who couldn't be present, for those whose struggles had gone unrecognized. This speech was bigger than her, and despite the nervous energy in her chest, she knew she had to deliver it. The summit was held in a grand conference hall filled with rows of uniformed military officials, government representatives, and prominent leaders. The room buzzed with energy and anticipation as attendees exchanged greetings, filling the space with a low hum of conversation. Emma took her place near the front, watching as speaker after speaker took the stage, addressing a range of topics from defense strategies to technological advancements. Finally, her name was announced. She stood, adjusting her uniform as she approached the podium, the bright stage lights illuminating her figure. The room fell into a respectful silence, but Emma could feel the weight of their collective gaze, the expectations, and the doubts hanging in the air. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice calm and steady. "Thank you for allowing me the honor of speaking to you today. I stand before you as Colonel Emma Grant, a proud member of the United States Marine Corps. But today, I also stand here as something more, a voice for the countless men and women who have served and continue to serve our country, yet feel invisible within the very institution they've dedicated their lives to." She paused, letting her words settle over the audience. She could see some heads nodding, others leaning in slightly, and a few expressions that remained guarded, skeptical. "For over 2 decades, I have served alongside some of the finest people I've ever known. I have witnessed acts of bravery, camaraderie, and sacrifice. But I have also witnessed moments that have challenged my understanding of fairness, of respect, and of equality. Moments when I, and others like me, have been made to feel as though we do not belong." Her voice remained steady, but she felt a surge of emotion building within her, a mixture of anger, frustration, and a deep-seated determination. She took a slow breath, grounding herself before she continued. "We talk a lot about strength in the military, about courage and resilience. But I am here to tell you that courage is not only found on the battlefield. Sometimes, courage is the quiet act of standing up for oneself, of challenging the assumptions that others make about you simply because of how you look or where you come from." She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had questioned her, those who had doubted her. She could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but she refused to let it intimidate her. Emma's words grew stronger as she delved into her personal experiences, recounting moments when her abilities had been questioned, when her commitment had been doubted not because of anything she had done, but because of the assumptions people had made about her. "I have been in rooms where decisions were made, where futures were shaped, and I have felt the quiet exclusion that comes from being seen as an outsider," she said, her voice soft but powerful. "I am not here to condemn those who may have doubted me, but I am here to say that we must do better. We must open our minds and our ranks to the diversity that strengthens us." She paused, allowing her words to resonate. She saw some faces soften, some shoulders relax, as her message began to reach beyond the defenses they had built. She knew that not everyone would be receptive, but she also knew that each person in the room had a role to play in shaping the future of the military. "We are a force for justice, for protection, for honor," she continued, her tone rising with conviction. "But how can we claim to embody these values if we do not also fight for equality within our own ranks? How can we protect the freedoms of others if we do not protect the dignity of those who serve?" Her words carried a weight that went beyond her rank, beyond her personal experiences. She was speaking for a collective struggle, a shared resilience that had yet to be fully acknowledged. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, a subtle but undeniable change in the atmosphere. As Emma finished her speech, the room was silent, the air heavy with contemplation. For a brief moment, she felt a surge of uncertainty. Had her words truly resonated, or would they be dismissed, forgotten? Then, slowly, one person stood, followed by another, and another, until the room was filled with standing figures, their expressions a mixture of respect and reflection. The applause began quietly, building gradually until it filled the entire hall, a powerful acknowledgement of her courage and her message. Emma felt a swell of relief, a quiet validation that her voice had been heard. She met the eyes of General Kinsey, who nodded at her with a look of pride and encouragement. She knew that her words had reached him, and she hoped they had reached others as well. As she stepped down from the podium, several attendees approached her, offering words of support and admiration. Some thanked her for her honesty. Others expressed a newfound awareness of the biases that still lingered within the military. Emma accepted their words with gratitude, But she knew that the true measure of her success would be in the actions that followed, in the changes that would hopefully be set in motion by her message. Later that evening, Emma returned to her hotel room, her mind still buzzing with the energy of the summit. She sat by the window, looking out over the city lights, her thoughts drifting back to the journey that had brought her here. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be resistance, pushback, and doubt. But she also knew that she had taken a step forward, a step that could inspire others to follow. Her speech had been a catalyst, a spark that she hoped would ignite a movement toward equality and respect within the military. Emma leaned back, closing her eyes, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had done what she had set out to do, and she knew that her words would continue to resonate, to challenge, to inspire. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Emma awoke to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. She reached for it, squinting at the bright screen. Dozens of notifications greeted her. Messages, emails, missed calls, and even mentions on social media platforms she barely used. She scrolled through, realizing that clips of her speech had gone viral overnight. People were sharing and reposting her words, some with captions like "True Leadership" or "The Future of the Military." There were messages from civil rights advocates, military veterans, young cadets, and even civilians who had never set foot on a base but felt moved by her story. Emma sat up, absorbing the overwhelming response. She had expected her speech to make an impact within military circles, but this was far more than she had anticipated. She felt a mixture of pride and uncertainty, the weight of a new responsibility settling over her. Her voice, once confined to a conference hall, had now reached people across the nation. As she read through the messages, she found one from General Kinsey, congratulating her on the speech and acknowledging the importance of her message. "Emma," he wrote, "you have given a voice to what so many have felt but couldn't say. This is only the beginning." The words stayed with her. She knew she was no longer just Emma Grant, the Marine colonel. She had become something more, an advocate, a symbol of change. And as much as the thought intimidated her, it also filled her with a renewed sense of purpose. Over the next few days, Emma's schedule filled with requests. News networks wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations invited her to speak. Military panels asked for her insights. She found herself thrust into the public eye. Her life transformed as her story took on a life of its own. One invitation stood out: a request from a major news network to participate in a televised roundtable on diversity and inclusion. The program would feature voices from across various sectors: business leaders, educators, activists, and her presence would represent the military perspective. Emma hesitated, feeling the weight of what such an appearance would entail. She had never intended to become a public figure, much less a symbol for reform. But as she read over the invitation, she remembered the faces in the audience at the summit, the quiet nods of support, the young cadets who had looked at her with newfound respect. She knew that this was an opportunity to reach an even wider audience, to continue pushing for change. After a few days of careful consideration, she agreed to participate. She spent hours preparing, crafting her talking points, anticipating potential questions, and reminding herself of the values she wanted to convey. When the day of the roundtable arrived, Emma sat at the polished table beneath bright studio lights, surrounded by other influential figures. The host welcomed each of them, setting the stage for a discussion on equality and the challenges of building inclusive institutions. As the conversation shifted to Emma, the host leaned forward, her tone respectful but probing. "Colonel Grant, your speech at the military summit has resonated with millions. Can you tell us what drives your commitment to diversity in such a traditionally hierarchical and uniform institution?" Emma took a breath, her gaze steady. "My commitment comes from my experiences, but it's not just about me. The strength of the military lies in its people, in the diversity of perspectives and backgrounds that each individual brings. But for too long, we've neglected that diversity, treating it as a challenge rather than an asset." She glanced around the table, meeting the eyes of each panelist. True inclusion isn't just about having diverse voices in the room. It's about ensuring those voices are heard, respected, and valued. If we don't do that, we risk losing the very people who could lead us into the future. The host nodded thoughtfully, but one of the panelists, a corporate executive, interjected. Colonel, isn't there a risk in emphasizing diversity over merit? Shouldn't our priority be on selecting the best, regardless of background? Emma kept her expression calm. Merit and diversity are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they strengthen each other. When we bring in diverse perspectives, we broaden our understanding, we challenge our assumptions, and we ultimately improve our decision-making. We can't reach our full potential if we only look to one type of experience or background. The discussion continued, Emma's words striking a chord with both viewers and her fellow panelists. She could feel the tension of resistance, but also the spark of understanding. The round table ended with a quiet sense of accomplishment, and as the cameras turned off, several panelists approached her, expressing their admiration and support. In the days following her appearance on the round table, Emma received both praise and criticism. Many within the military applauded her courage, thanking her for voicing what they had long felt but hadn't dared to express. But there was also resistance, voices from within her ranks who questioned her loyalty, who accused her of challenging traditions that had stood for centuries. Anonymous comments circulated, some questioning her qualifications, others hinting that she was too political for a Marine colonel. Emma read each comment carefully, feeling the sting of each criticism, but also the resolve to press forward. One evening, she received a call from a fellow officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Moore, who had also faced her share of challenges as one of the few women in their rank. Emma, Sarah said, her voice a mixture of admiration and concern, you're making history, but you're also making enemies. Are you sure this is what you want? Emma leaned against the wall, her gaze fixed on the city lights beyond her window. I didn't choose this path, Sarah. It chose me. I've spent my career proving myself, and now I want to ensure that others don't have to fight the same battles. This isn't just about me, it's about creating a better future for all of us. Sarah paused, then spoke softly. Then know that you're not alone. There are more of us out here, ready to stand with you. The words filled Emma with a renewed sense of strength. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that she wasn't walking it alone. Over the next several months, Emma continued to receive invitations to speak, to share her story, and to advocate for reform. She traveled to military bases, universities, and conferences, each stop a new opportunity to spread her message. At every event, she saw faces light up with understanding, heard voices express gratitude, and felt the quiet support of those who shared her vision. Her words resonated with young cadets, who saw in her a leader who understood their struggles and believed in their potential. She listened to veterans, men and women who had served decades before her, who shared their own stories of resilience and thanked her for carrying forward the fight they had started. But she also faced setbacks. Proposals for reform were met with bureaucratic resistance, her ideas challenged by those who felt the military should remain unchanged. At times, the frustration felt overwhelming, and she questioned whether her efforts would ever lead to real change. Yet, each time she felt discouraged, she reminded herself of her purpose. She thought of the young soldier who looked up to her, the cadets who followed in her footsteps, the countless individuals who had been told they didn't belong. They were her motivation, her reason to keep pushing forward. One evening, after returning from a speaking engagement, Emma found herself alone in her office, surrounded by the medals and commendations she had earned throughout her career. She picked up one of the medals, running her fingers over the smooth surface, feeling the weight of it in her hand. These medals represented years of service, of dedication, of battles fought both on the battlefield and within the institution she loved. But they also represented something deeper, a testament to the resilience she had built, the strength she had cultivated in the face of doubt and discrimination. As she held the medal, she thought about the journey she had taken, the sacrifices she had made, and the people she had met along the way. She knew that her work was far from over, that the fight for equality and respect within the military would continue long after she was gone. But she also knew that she had planted a seed, a spark that would grow and spread, inspiring others to carry forward the torch. Emma placed the medal back on the shelf, her gaze steady, her heart full. She was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, for the long road that stretched before her. She had found her purpose, and she was committed to seeing it through. As she turned off the light and left her office, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She had become more than a soldier, more than a colonel. She had become a voice for change, a symbol of resilience and hope. And she knew that, no matter what obstacles she faced, she would continue to stand her ground, to fight for a future where everyone could serve with dignity and respect. This was her mission, her calling, her legacy. Years later, as Emma retired from active service, she was honored in a ceremony attended by colleagues, family, and the many lives she had touched. She looked out at the faces in the crowd, men and women of every background, each one a testament to the change she had helped bring. Emma smiled, a quiet pride filling her as she realized the impact of her journey. She had fought for her place, for the voices of those who had been silenced, and she had paved the way for future generations. Her legacy would live on, a testament to the power of resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice. And as the applause filled the room, she knew that her work had been worth every struggle, every sacrifice. She had left a mark, and it would endure. Thank you for following Emma's powerful journey as she fights for dignity, respect, and change. Her story reminds us that each voice can make a difference, and every step forward counts. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more inspiring journeys of resilience, courage, and transformation, don't forget to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. We'd love to have you with us as we continue sharing stories that matter.